One of the things we value at the CTE is the opportunity to get expertise brought to us and shared with our faculty. That's one of the main reasons why we're here. So today is an exciting session because we get teaching experts that are going to share with you what works for them. The format of what we're going to do today is we're going to start off with a question, let each of our panelists respond, and then we'll open it up to you all to pose questions to the group or individually as you see fit and as you would like to know. And we'll do that for a while, and we've got some other questions we can ask as we go throughout. As we go through this discussion, what I need you to do is pass this microphone around. If you'd like to ask a question, if you raise your hand, I'll bring you the microphone. There's no beatboxing because we don't want that type of activity, but you're welcome to ask questions, and it will be recorded here and stored in our web archives. A couple things to let you know. First of all, this is our goldenrod form. Everything we do here at the CTE is listed on this calendar, and on the back is some information about an upcoming event. It's too late to submit a proposal, but I'd like to draw your attention to Oktoberfest, which happens on Friday, October 12th. It's a symposium on excellent teaching. We have 24 sessions on everything from clickers to pedagogical practices to educational psychology. Our guest speaker, the keynote speaker, is Robert Duke from UT Austin. He's a specialist in music, learning, and cognition, but he has a lot to offer just to teachers in general. So I hope you'll come and spend some time with us there. Information about that session is also on our website. So please go register there and come spend part of the day with us at least. You can register for a free lunch as well. And we have a reception afterwards for networking, which should be a lot of fun. The second thing I would like to ask you to do is once we're done with this session, if you wouldn't mind taking a pen or a pencil and filling out this evaluation form and leaving it with Reed on your way out. That helps us evaluate the effectiveness of our sessions and make sure that we're meeting your needs as faculty through our work here at the CTE. So, without further waiting and me blabbing, let's let these gentlemen talk. So we'll start here with Northrop. They can introduce themselves, give you a little bit about their expertise, and then we'll start with the question. Go ahead.
Yeah. I guess. I don't think the mic's working.
But it's going just to the camera.
Okay. I'm from the Department of Art, and I teach in media arts, which is an area within the Department of Art. And my background, I actually came from Hollywood. I am a screenwriter, and I've sold scripts to various movie studios. And I got also involved in, even though I was hired to be the screenwriting professor here, I got involved in California and in Japan in the Japanese manga industry, which is Japanese comics, which is a very successful industry. And I actually ended up pitching a project to 20th Century Fox that they acquired for James Cameron. And he's going to make it, he's planning on making it after Avatar 3. So I teach Japanese manga as well. So that's my background.
My name is John Ferry. I'm from the chemistry department. I teach quantitative analysis and environmental chemistry. My background is really in environmental. And I have at times taught freshmen, and these range in class from size of about 250 on the freshman end to 10 to 15 on the upper level sort of environmental chemistry end.
Thanks. My name is Tony Gerals. I teach in the English department. I've been here since 2005, and I teach mostly 18th century British literature and Romanticism, but I do large lecture courses for undergraduate non-majors, themes in British Lit, Intro to British Lit, as well as graduate classes, so the whole range.
Good. So go ahead and keep the mic, Tony. Why don't we start? You can answer the first question, and each of you will answer this as we go. The first question that we're going to start with today is, what do you think compromises good teaching? And if you can share some examples that illustrate your teaching philosophy in that answer. So go ahead, Tony.
Okay, you want me to talk about what compromises good teaching?
Sure.
Okay. Because I could probably do that more effectively than what comprises. I'm not sure what comprises good teaching, because I'm often surprised by things that happen in the classroom, by my evaluations, certainly by nominations for awards. So I don't always actually know when I'm doing it as I should be. I will say that for me, good teaching starts with preparation. It starts with content. And I feel at my best in the classroom when I feel in control of the content. So that sounds kind of control freaky, and it sort of is. And it is leading up to the moment of class. I like to think that once I get into the class, I relinquish that control freakishness, and it's the being in command of the material that allows me to kind of let go and to explore other possibilities once I'm in the classroom. So this might be for anyone out there who's especially anxious in their sort of disposition, but good teaching starts with content. I try to build in from the start in my syllabus and in my sort of course plan, the things that I'm going to do during the week, a couple of points that I want to see through each text or issue or article that we're reading, to prepare for that, even over-prepare for it sometimes, so that when I get into the class, if there isn't the kind of response that I hope for, I can sort of push through in that class and just go it on my own and hope to get it in the next class. The best moments, of course, are when I can do that for a little bit, for a few minutes, to put some things on the table, and then let the students take it in their own direction, which can then be brought back in the following class. So my approach is not very radical. It's pretty straightforward. I try to remind myself when I'm not feeling very good in the classroom that I have this content to fall back on, that I have an organization that I've planned and that I just have to trust it, and I go with that. So I'm happy to talk specific examples, or we can sort of let everybody go ahead and then
let John respond, and then we can let Marshall, and we'll come back around and do some examples. That's great. Thank you.
Well, I think one of the ways that, at least in chemistry, we're sort of fortunate is that we have an external accrediting body, the American Chemical Society. And they have, over many years, with the input of literally thousands of people, put together a plan for how our students are expected to progress in terms of what skills we expect them to get when. So when we start a class, it gives us the benefit of having a pattern. We know what product we're supposed to be making by the end of the class. So it allows you to apply some long-term planning. You can look at what topic matter you know they've covered in the classes that come before. You know what they're supposed to be able to do when they finish, if they're going to pass the next class in the sequence. And it really allows you to sort of focus on the immediate issues of sort of skill acquisition that are so important for a person in the physical sciences. So I think that's probably the biggest help for me from teaching, is just being able to take advantage of that larger community and take their feedback in how we should be shaping and organizing our classes.
So, because I'm dealing partially or a whole lot with people who are doing creative production, they're either writing scripts or they're creating mangas, I really want to drive them and inspire them to reach the absolute limits of their creative capacity. I really think of their brains, it's like I used to tell my daughter, your brain is like a Ferrari, and it has to be driven really fast. And one of my students compared my class to another class in our department. Their class is like driver's ed. Your class is like NASCAR, about the Mungo class. And I said, you've got an A. No, but I was complimented by that, because it was reflecting the degree to which I want to take them to the limit. But it's a cliche about leaving none behind. Our department has been known, unfortunately, as somewhat of a dumping ground, sometimes for people with low GPAs, and sometimes people who are feeling a little bit looped out, who might drop out. And I really try to reach every single one of them that I can and believe in them, but I also push them really hard. I don't let them just sit there. I drive them. If they're not going to drive themselves, I'm going to drive them, unless I think they're going to have a nervous breakdown, and then I stop. But basically, I believe that people can go a lot further than they do normally, including myself. And another thing that I really believe in is for me to be practicing out in the world. I bring stories about my experiences in Hollywood and in the publishing industry, and I try to insert the best students into those situations. And kind of like, I remember seeing an old Russian documentary where they were, during the communist era, dropping infants into a swimming pool, and they just hold their breath and like little fish and swim to the top. And I thought that was pretty scary, but in a way I prepare them the best that they can be prepared from my own experience and my own work, and I bring it back into the classroom and then I push them back out there. So those are sort of several aspects of my kind of approach, building on what these gentlemen said, which I also do.
Tony, you had mentioned some examples of how you go about this use of content in your classes. Can you share some of those?
Sure. So one of the things that, as someone who teaches literature from a couple of hundred years ago, that I try to emphasize is a connection between those literary texts and history and to this past. And a lot of my students come from sort of a high school education in which they've been encouraged to constantly identify those texts with the present, right? So how is this relevant to you now, right today? I try to resist that. I try to sort of look at formal features of literary texts as sort of ingenious devices for engaging a text's historical or cultural moment, and I try to really sort of keep a sort of open orientation toward that otherness of history. So in order to kind of, just recently in the last few semesters, in order to kind of add to those keywords, form and history, I've started to think a lot about the word mediation and how this might be able to allow me to keep my emphasis on this kind of historical otherness, but also to tie these moments to the present that the students seem to want to do, but also seem to be very able to do. Okay, so if I ask, what kinds of characters did 18th century novels make possible? Right? Then I'm talking not just about a particular book, although we usually are, or a particular author, but about a medium, about the novel. And we can ask similar questions right after we address that historical one, such as what kinds of characters does Facebook make possible? Okay? How does the medium itself allow a certain kind of character to come into being? What are the features of that? How does this work? Right? So addressing form and history through the question of mediation, right, has been a way recently that I've tried to adapt to what I see as a real push in the class to stay in the present, but also to sort of look at these moments, these specific forms of media in their historical moment, say a novel in the 18th century, a circulating library in the 19th century, right? A particular internet interface in the present. So that would be one example. I mean, that's sort of meta. I mean, we can get sort of more specific about actual exercises in the classroom if you want.
Great. John or Northrop, do you have anything to add to that in your own experience?
Well, when we try and work examples into the classroom, again, I think it's really critically important to remember the context of the students that we're producing when we do it. So when you look around, for instance, the state of South Carolina, our chemistry department produces more chemistry undergraduates per year than any other department in the state, and it's only about 130 graduates per year at the bachelor's level. That means the people we're producing, for one thing, are very rare and special, but they also speak a very highly specialized language in the sense that really not many other people have gone through this experience, so they don't share that with them. So when we produce people that we want to be able to act as competent professionals out there in the broader community, that means we have to bring examples into the classroom that allow them to practice sort of bridging that gap for between speaking with professionals who do what they do and speaking with people who don't. So we spent a lot of time in our classes, or I spent a lot of time in my classes, having students work through assignments where I asked them to not just solve a particular problem. I don't care how many grams of something there might be in the product. I asked them to solve for it, and then in their answer, they're required to explain it. All right, so you're not just we don't just allow people to give an answer back of say 25 grams. Instead, they have to explain what the actual calculation was, and this is almost a simulation of what it's going to be like when they're explaining what they do professionally to their future coworkers. When they can't get it, it's important to not just accept the wrong answer, mark them off, and go on. Instead, when they can't get it, what they have to do is redo it. So it makes for a lot of extra grading, but sometimes it's the only way to really school people with feeling easy about expressing what it is they do to a broader audience. So.
I'm not really sure how that question applies to what I'm doing. I mean,
Okay.
Can you rephrase it?
Yeah, experiences that illustrate your teaching philosophy. So if you're talking about this idea of, and I think you already kind of touched on one where you said that when you experience something in your professional life, you bring that back into your classroom and try to immediately plug students into it. Can you maybe give us some examples of
Sure. I mean,
just how that works?
well, I not only show them triumphs and positive things that have happened to me professionally, but I've also shown them kind of versions of car wrecks that have happened to me. I, for instance, said it'll never get worse than it was when I pitched a project to Ridley Scott, and he used the BS word to describe what I just pitched him. And he was my hero because I love sci-fi, and he directed Blade Runner and Alien. And so I thought, my goodness, and I just kept going, and he said it again. And at that point, I kind of blacked out. I think 20 years of therapy might, reveal what happened next. I don't know. I just remember stumbling out of the office and being told by his producer, he loves it. And I'm just wondering, were you in that room? But I show everything to the students so that they're really aware of what can happen out there and that they've got to be strong, and that I'll use that as an illustration. This is why you've got to be incredibly prepared, because I was so prepared that there was nothing that he would say to me that would keep me from completing the pitch, no matter how shaken I was. But I left, and I use it as another example, thinking maybe I shouldn't continue with this story. And I wrote another script instead of that and sold it for $250,000. So I say, thank you, Ridley Scott. There are many dimensions to these real life experiences, and I try to basically bring them out to the students. And it's an amazing process because they know I'm not afraid to show how I've lost and my weaknesses, and I'm not puffing myself up to them because I have no right to do that. But that kind of humanizes me to them and kind of makes them more receptive to what I'm saying, because I think in the entertainment arts sometimes you get a lot of puffery, and so that's just one example.
Excellent. So, here's the golden ticket. And what I'd like for you to do is, if you have a question you'd like to ask, just raise your hand and I'll bring you the microphone, and then we'll just pass this around. Now, there's no sound coming out here. This is so we can pick it up on the camera, so you don't have to hold it up terribly close. But the floor is now open for questions. You can address it to the entire panel, or you can address it to one specific member. So, who would like to go first? All right, Renee.
Hi, this is to the whole panel. Do any of you use any active learning techniques in your classes? Getting up and do role playing, that type of thing.
I can start off just because that's what that when you get into, storytelling and fictional storytelling, you can do a little bit more of that kind of thing, possibly. I let them, act out the performance of their characters, obviously. There was a guy kind of shouting about his pirate characters today in Mungo, and it was getting a little scary. But nonetheless, obviously, like today I gave them an exercise in screenwriting where I said, write a scene either from your life or somebody and it doesn't have to be personal, in which there was a revelation or a major change came about. And I was in their, plot line of their story that you knew about them. And I used that to illustrate how in writing an individual scene of a screenplay, there tends to be a revelation or a development of a plot point or whatever. So obviously they can feed their life into it.
I guess I don't think people recognize it as such very often, which is a shame. But of course, every laboratory class is an exercise in active learning, and we have a lab that accompanies essentially every one of the major courses in our curriculum. So there's a tremendous amount of active learning going on in that sense. In addition to that, in my upper level courses, I do a great deal of group work. And that allows you to hold people to a higher standard than any single person could on a project. And they're great critiques of each other. They also are allowed to evaluate each other, give blind evaluations after a group assignment. And I got to say, nobody grades an undergraduate more harshly than another undergraduate. It's awesome. But things like that.
I do a little bit, I guess. I mean, starting with reading poetry aloud and just trying to get and also to give a sense of comfort with what seems sometimes to be very alien language, and also through practicing some of the genres of critical writing that we would be expected to do. I'm not sure if that counts as active learning, but say, do a close reading of these 4 lines, right? And a close reading is this, right? And so try to do that, and so and they'll work that out and then present that, or even on occasion to do something a little less formal, such as going back and writing a review for a student newspaper in 1801 of a Jane Austen novel or something like that, or I guess it wouldn't be Jane Austen since she wasn't published then, but of some such, to try to grab a sort of voice from the past to engage the book on the terms that they think it should be engaged at that moment. So a little bit.
Next. Sure, go ahead.
I thought his point about having students critiquing each other was fantastic. I mean, I actually don't want to talk, and neither do they, because we just want to hear each other talk. We were saying that before the panel. They have such great information, but I'm tasked with the fact that when I go up for tenure after 5 years soon, I will have taught about 600 students. Every single one either wrote a screenplay, a television script, or a manga. So the only way to deal with this in a high quality manner was to figure out a way to have them critique each other. And so we have them critique each other on Blackboard. We have them work 9 hours a week outside of class in groups and critique each other. And otherwise the whole thing falls apart. And you have to invent these new ways for handling large numbers, and I'm sure my colleagues also have had to do such things. So it's really important to try to be innovative on those things and teach the students and then teach them to teach each other. And then, of course, they end up teaching us.
Yeah, I have a question basically on how you see your role in the students' life. Some people approach the classroom as a dictator. Other people approach the classroom sort of identifying themselves as a physician or authoritarian, or maybe even a father, or even a salesman with the information that they present, and et cetera. And so, as people have won the teaching award, there's obviously good feedback, from students about your teaching style. So I was just wondering if you could sort of disclose your angle, or sort of if you've ever thought about your role in the classroom and how that applies with, how that changes the interaction between you and your students.
Well, I'll start off because I don't think they quite want to yet. I would just say that, and I'm the blabbermouth from the art department, but I would say that I noticed a cultural thing about the University of South Carolina, which I guess is the South, which was a sort of reticence of the students perhaps to show their emotion or how they feel. But I feel like they are really judging us privately without showing us. And I've had to kind of develop this way of understanding the code at which they're using to relate to me and how they evaluate me. Certainly I don't want to be a dictator, and I doubt anybody up here does, but I also don't want it to be kind of like, hey, dude, let's go hang out. I mean, my TA can be that way with me, but there is this sort of formality that you find in the South that's kind of good because it does create somewhat of a respect level to begin with, which is important. But it's a very dicey thing because you're trying to read them and get them engaged, and sometimes they're kind of like not getting engaged. And so I've had to kind of understand their code a little bit, like when someone's up there showing their manga, if they're kind of like this, or they will send these kind of secret signals as to how they feel that are nonverbal signals. I don't know if y'all have found that, as how they're both relating to you and relating to the other students.
I guess when I find people describing me with words that don't relate to teaching, they're not good words. So, not entirely sure how to answer the question. I mean, I think you walk into the room, you have to be respectful of the fact that they're paying thousands of dollars to be there. And so you don't necessarily want to assume a role of any kind, except one that appreciates the effort and money they and their families are putting into this whole experience. That's about all I have for it. Sorry.
Yeah, I would just say that when I go into the classroom, I try to pretend that I'm a teacher. So, I mean, and that's it. I mean, like whatever that happens to sort of be in my mind, and that involves certain lines that I don't want to cross, and that if I have any impact on the lives of students that's not directly related to what they're doing in that course, I hope it's very indirect through sort of modeling a kind of approach to material and openness to different ideas rather than any kind of direct, influence.
Next. Yeah. Okay, we can do in the back, and then we'll come up here.
How do you see yourself learning, having grown and changed your teaching over time to become more successful? What sort of changes have you made? I'm assuming that you haven't been award-winning from the first day you started teaching, but if that assumption is true, what have you done to improve your teaching?
I don't want to say nothing, but I mean, I think I'm doing very much the same kinds of things that I've always been doing. I'm just better at them now than I was, and partly that's from confidence, from having done it, from a certain comfort level in the classroom and knowing that I can work in different spaces with different groups of people and feel a little more ready for the kinds of things that are thrown at me. So I'm probably more successful at adapting to, every class is different, every group is different than I was at the start, but I don't feel that I've sort of sat down and really tried to work through what I see to be particular problems that would make me a better teacher, but rather, I mean, I've watched my colleagues teach, I listen to other people talk about teaching, and those things help. But it's all just part of how I see the job more than a sort of conscious decision to be a great teacher.
In our department, we do a great deal of peer review of each other. So you can count on pretty routine visits from your colleagues in your classes. And of course, it's critical that you listen to whatever it is they have to say, especially, some of them are much more experienced and really have some valuable insight. But after that, and certainly the being comfortable part, students know if you're not comfortable, right? The next most important thing for me was making sure I understood, I know I've already mentioned this, but understood the continuity of our program. So I understood what kind of students were walking in the door and what was expected of them once they walked out, so that we could better sort of serve that need.
Well, the last week I showed a documentary called Jiro Dreams of Sushi about the top sushi chef in the world. I see some heads nodding, who's over 80. And, I said to my students, you must wonder why I'm showing you a documentary in screenwriting and TV writing in manga class. And it's because Jiro is like 82. He's got a 6 or 8 seat restaurant. You have to book the seat a year in advance. He charges $300 to just sit down. And he doesn't care about the money at all. And all he's doing is improving his craft every single day and minute he's awake in his life. And he loves it. And I think that part of it is continually attempting to improve your teaching. I was at this event last year. And I walked in and I was so happy to see that my TA was here. And I didn't ask her and I didn't tell her about it. So you may be up here next year because if you're faculty that's eligible for this award, because it's really about learning from other people and just growing and continuing to grow your whole life. And Jiro said it, they're like, he's like, I won't quit until a customer says you're senile. But otherwise, he's going to stay there till the end and keep getting better. So that's my approach.
Coming back to the kind of same topic that you were guys talking before, have you met a professor or teacher that was too ambitious and that was pushing their students to the limit, that they were not being able to cope with what was being taught?
By the way, I was joking about the nervous breakdown thing. All I meant was, I saw some looks when I said that. All I meant was people can go a lot further usually than they think they can, but certainly a professor or any teacher needs to be extremely sensitive and constantly questioning and making sure that people understand what's expected of them and can do the work. And making yourself constantly available during office hours or through email or through the TA if they don't want to say their name, this TA can pass it along anonymously if they're lost in any way, and, other issues outside of the classroom. I don't know people doing that, but I would hope that everyone keeps an eye on things.
I don't know anybody who does it on purpose. You could do it by accident all the time. So long as they're comfortable talking to you and asking for help when they need it, they can keep that process sort of self-correcting. If they're not comfortable talking to their professor, or if they feel like their professor is scary or distant or unpredictable, predictability is huge. If they feel like they're unpredictable, then the process is not self-correcting, and then people who overpush by accident can end up becoming people who do it by habit, and that's unfortunate.
I'll just add, I'm sure I do it in my classes as well, but I try to build in spaces for those students who may think that I'm scary or don't want to bring it up in class or whatever. One place is on Blackboard. I'll open an anonymous forum for students to post criticisms or questions, or even just to say things like the pace is too fast. That works in some classes. If a few students started out early, then students seem to see it as a space where they can go. If they don't, then I will sometimes have a class where at the end of the semester there's not a single remark there. Other things that I've done, I taught a large lecture course of a couple hundred students year before last. It seemed clear to me that things were not going very well about halfway through, so I just had them write a letter to me in class one day. And to turn it into their TAs, I said, you don't have to put your name on it. I'd just like to hear how things are going for you and what you think your sort of biggest problems are right now with the course, or if there's something going well, let me know. From those, I learned, first of all, that things were going a little better than I thought they were, but that some students felt they were being pushed a little bit too hard in terms of reading material. So I took out one of the texts that we were supposed to read. They were very happy about that. It seemed to sort of lead to a little bit more energy with the stuff that we were reading. So I like to think that students can come and talk to me if they need to, but for those who don't feel that they can, I like to have a couple of spaces where they can write something out without putting their name on it or without addressing me eye to eye.
There's a practical service the university offers that your department can work out with the university, and that's this SI program or supplemental instructor program, especially for introductory courses. In that case, you take a student who's done a good job going through that course before, and they're sort of an extra TA or liaison for that class with you. So, for example, we use those a lot in our freshman chemistry courses, and it's really interesting. If you'll see an ordinary TA or a regular graduate student TA have a review session before a test, and then walk in when the supplemental instructor TA is having a review session before a test, the differences in attendance sometimes can be really interesting. If you have a good SI undergraduate, the other undergraduates can be so much more comfortable around them that those problems where you end up accidentally pushing can get communicated back to you very, very easily through that program. That's a real nice program.
I also just forgot to say, and they reminded me that I pass out halfway through the semester an anonymous form asking for any kind of feedback, negative or positive. And sometimes I get them handed in with their name written on it to my face, like, "Hi, I like what you're doing." But the one I really want to know the truth, and I work on my fixes and I fix the problems. I always tell them I want to know what's the problem before you do your final evaluations. I would like to actually fix what I'm doing wrong, and I, like the other gentleman, very much view that they are the customers. I mean, I hate to use that word, and I know that's a bad word for some people, but they really are. And being in Faculty Senate, I've seen how the budget has changed, given to us by the state so little at this point, and we really are. Tuition is supporting us. So.
Towards the back.
Just to amplify a little bit on I'm John Dawson, the chemistry department, same department as John Ferry. Maybe John could amplify a bit on this, but the point is that came brought up in the previous question about driving the students too hard. If you're teaching the first semester of a 2-semester course, as I've done, as John I think has done, you have to cover a certain amount of material. There's really, you just can't all of a sudden decide to leave out 2 chapters, because the students have to have those chapters when they take the next semester.
It's also important, if you're teaching a sequence course, to make sure you teach all the courses in that sequence at least once, so you become familiar with what is expected all the way through.
We recently this weekend we had a media arts get-together, a retreat, where all the professors sat down with film studies professors to try to fully understand each other's courses and figure out ways in which we could build in things earlier in the sequence and skills so that we wouldn't overload it at the 500 level, which for us is the kind of penultimate if you're an undergraduate, and it was extremely useful.
Well, I have a quick question about the engaging the students in their learning. So what is the most effective way or strategy or strategies that you use in the classroom to engage them in the learning? For example, get them prepared for the class before they come to the classroom, read the chapters, and also finish the assignments with high quality. So how do you do that? Thank you.
I'll start. Well, it gets better throughout the semester, I think. So we start very slowly, especially if we're doing these older literatures that seem very foreign to students. I'll demonstrate in class. I'll practice with them, working through difficult poetry, how to read it. I'll sometimes have them write it out as prose and then see if it's as difficult for them to understand if it's written out in paragraph form. I'll do response papers online that works sometimes it doesn't. A lot of times with the material that I'm dealing with, I find it useful to have them come to class. I prepare worksheets. I mean, it's a silly term, but with specific passages and questions that I want to direct them to, and have them struggle through those in the first bit of class, and then to use that as the basis for discussion. Well, I try to, the worksheets are pretty consistent, right? They don't know which passages I'm going to focus on, but they know halfway through the semester how I'm going to go about it, and I find that they get a lot better as they are practicing a consistent set of moves or strategies, that they are starting to learn not just the material, but the certain strategies for knowing what to do with or having something to do with that material. So.
Homework is always a problem. If you walk into the room and you care a lot, and they don't care at all, or it seems like they don't care at all, the average level of caring in the room can be high, but the average level of success won't. All right? So you can't really carry them along with you as much. In the sort of sad cases where you have a class like that, the way that I have dealt with this is make sure I am painfully explicit on what they understand the relationship between the homework or the preparative work and the outcome they're looking for, the grade, is. I've commented before that, to me, the outcome that's really important is making sure they can succeed, they can go on in the program and be successful. But that's not necessarily their goal at all. All right? Their goal is to walk away with a good grade, and frankly, the way we've changed budgeting for higher education, that's an understandable goal, right? For a lot of them, that grade equals a lot of money. And so it's really very important to them. So when all else fails, so long as they can understand very clearly the link between that preparative work and the grade, and that means sometimes we need to understand that link very clearly, right? If you assign something for them to read that is to their benefit, but not necessarily to the benefit of their grade, it'll make them a better person, but not more likely to get that student loan renewed or whatever other kind of fellowship renewed, then you haven't really connected in with what might be the most valuable thing to that student. So that it is a challenge, and the challenge comes from identifying what it is they're most concerned about at any given point and making sure that prep work connects to their concern.
I have similar concerns, and in the arts it's a little bit different because often the students can view it as that they can slack, and they're really trying to look at how they're going to be evaluated. And of course, that's made very clear by me in the syllabus. But ultimately, sometimes I have to use the quiz or test threat to make sure that they're actually going to read the material. Because sometimes they'll just kind of see right through you that you're not going to do that unless you really do it. So that's one thing. I use humor and I use reality. I've said to them before, do you want to get out of here? Because we're in the arts, and be saying, would you like fries with that, ma'am? How do you feel about working at Burger King? All kinds of different ways to motivate them. Sometimes it's through pressure like that, but I do it positively as well. I say, don't you want to come out of media arts with a fantastic portfolio piece that you can take out into the world and get you conceivably, hopefully, employment doing what you want to do, reaching your dreams? You've got to get this done and get this done really well. But as the gentleman said, you really can't. At one point, you can do so much, but at one point there's an internal gyroscope, the internal drive that they need to have as well, I think, in the arts.
So related with that ties in nicely to one of the questions here. So take that one step further. How do you get a student engaged with the profession? Apart from just the course content, how do you get them engaged with the broader profession that you do, especially when you're dealing with graduate students in the upper level who are going to be doing the same type of roles that you are professionally?
Well, in our program, it's research. None of us went into chemistry because we wanted to sit in an office and read papers and books all day. All of us went into it because we really enjoyed working with our hands in the lab and doing those things. And, those sorts of passions on our part communicate very clearly to them when we all work in the lab together on research. That's our best preparation. And it's really one of the only things we know. If it's not uncommon in a chemistry faculty, for example, or I think a lot of physical sciences, to look around and discover that very few, if any, of your faculty have ever had jobs outside of academia, right? Other than the high school, soda counter type job or something like that. So the only thing we really know that we can communicate with them in that sense is the kind of ultimate expression of what it is we do, and at least in chemistry, that's research. So,
I have so many students that, and like so many people teaching here, they've got to kind of drive up into my face, and I tell them, get up into my face, and then I will try to get them out into the world, into professional situations. And it's a huge amount of work on my part because it's the arts, and nobody wants to employ anybody hardly in the arts, And so as a result, I do things like set up internships at Kodansha USA, a division of Random House, which is the manga publisher in New York City, and get my students going up there, and they spend the summer in New York City working with Dallas Midah, the editor there, and both of them, ones that went this summer, got job offers. I also have a group out in Los Angeles of students who are making their way into the movie industry, and I work through my contacts to try to introduce them to interview situations. The ones who are already out in LA serve as this sort of welcoming group for ones that are graduating. We right here at Thomas Cooper go into the new video conferencing little suites, and we put them up on Skype, and their faces pop up from Los Angeles, and many, I just do countless number of things to try to network them in and get them to be, and I train them as well. I train them to be assistants because normally that's what they're going to have to do at first in the entertainment industry. And I tell them that they can't fail me because they'll be failing all the other students afterwards, because I won't be able to get students into positions with that person in the future if they mess up. And so there's a lot of training that takes place there. We do a lot of that training over the summer. They also serve as an assistant for me on my projects as I train them. I show them how I work in rewriting, say, a screenplay that's of mine that's owned by a studio, so that they can learn what they're going to need to do if they get into that situation. I actually have them interfacing with really top people in the movie and the publishing industry, working with me, and I will trust them to do it once they've shown me that they won't step over certain important creative, certain limits, like don't ask the studio president for a job, just be the assistant here. But you can ask his assistant for a lead into a job. So I'm teaching him about the protocols and the traditions of the industry.
At the in upper level classes or graduate classes, I think the difference really is introducing them to the profession. So in my field, that the start for that is to introduce them to what we very loosely call theory, which is something that I use sparingly in my undergraduate classes, but really makes up the kind of heart of the graduate class, and this is the kind of beginnings for research. I will selectively do it at the undergraduate level. I will choose articles, and I will and try to sort of help students choose articles. That can be a whole daunting world in itself. I think introducing undergraduates to some professional controversies or problems or questions is a good way as well to provide a kind of a different sort of direction than the one that John was just talking about, with the kind of grade-oriented direction, to say, in a sense, this isn't just about you and your grade, right? Part of my job is to kind of mess with your expectations a little bit and to show how that's important for your education, and that this just isn't, this is the part of the kind of customer model of education that I resent, that I have this product, that they come into class and that I give it to them. And maybe this goes back to a kind of traditional liberal arts approach, where I feel that challenging that whole sort of model is part of what the courses that I teach is supposed to do. And I think the profession, which has its own problems as well, so I wouldn't want to replace that, can be one area where I go in and can say, these are some questions, this is a real vocabulary, these are real problems that go beyond, say, what you're learning in this class, and that you can get introduced to, that you can try to think through, and might even have some application in other fields or other areas that you're interested in.
Just ask. Hi, I'm going to be kind of unconventional and ask a couple questions. Is that okay? My first one is, how do you, if we were your class, undergrad, beginning level, how do you start a semester? What do you do the first day of class? And then anything creative that you would do on the flip side to end the semester?
What I tend to begin with is that I want their work ultimately to be meaningful. I want it to be thematic, and I teach them the cultural background, for instance, in manga class, of where manga came from and how Tezuka who created the form, believed that a story is like a tree and it's only as strong as its roots, and its roots are its thematics, is its greater meaning. And so I try to immediately start framing things both culturally, thematically, artistically, and show kind of the backgrounds of the forms. And I start getting them comfortable with each other, which means I do a little exercise like have them interview each other for a minute or say hello to your neighbor. And I also start something right away which is called dinner dialogues, which is we schedule a day that they will come to my place and have dinner with me, because that makes them a lot more comfortable to begin critiquing each other and begin presenting in class their projects as we rapidly begin to develop them. So I also introduce myself and I tell them of my background. I explain why I'm telling them, which is to establish credibility with them. And to train them in turn to do that themselves when they pitch. So, because that's what they're doing.
When I teach, you said an introductory class for like freshmen.
Yeah, any
basically.
practical rules or day one sort of stuff?
With freshmen in particular, where it may be the first time they've ever walked into a college classroom, I think it is critical for them to sort of understand or have a roadmap of the kind of things you expect, and then in turn what they can expect from you from day one. So that means you need a syllabus. It needs to be pretty detailed. You need to have your schedule of exams. All right? It's astonishing how many people start a freshman class and schedule exams on the fly.
Yeah.
You know, we finished chapter 3, so I guess it's time for an exam. That's terrible for freshmen. You know, this is their first time away from home. It's the first time they haven't had, you know, for a lot of them, a parent imposing a lot of order on their lives. You don't want to be their parent, but a little bit of order is not a bad thing for them. So in teaching freshman classes on day one, you know, showing them the relationship that you expect them to have with the class, I think is really important.
I would agree with what John just said about having a detailed syllabus. And my whatever level class I'm teaching, the way that I start is to go over that syllabus, not only to point out those kind of important dates that are coming up in the future, but to provide a description of the course that explains the description of the course and and what we're going to be doing. And because of the sort of endless problems with ordering books and things like that, I will usually just print on the syllabus a couple of excerpts or short poems or essays right there on the syllabus so that we can start. And that we have something for the next class as well, so that they get a first week to get that textbook. I'll try to make it something sort of interesting and fresh, so that it will get into things in a good positive way. But I find that after sort of explaining the kind of meta parts of the course, jumping into something specific and saying this is what it's going to look like, in our daily classes, it's helpful for me to get going, and it gives me something to pick up with the next class.
Yeah. I'm going to add one other thing, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I don't know that I've ever heard anyone confess to doing this, but I've heard anecdotally from students that they have had faculty who hand out the syllabus on day one and do not lecture. Since on that first day you're trying to sort of define the relationship between the professor and the student in the class for that semester, defining the relationship by not lecturing is a terrible start. And it's kind of shocking how often I hear the students say this. I don't know if this is one of those urban legends that they all have you.
No, it happens.
It happens?
Yeah, I wanted to add what John said is I believe actually in making an assignment the first day, because I think that's just a furtherance of like we're getting going here, and the book ordering thing is always a problem with me as well. And also just to echo what they said, I go over the syllabus line by line. And I find if I don't, I will pay later. And that includes the attendance policy, all important, the grading scale, everything. And I read it line by line. So.
You mentioned dinner dialogues, and that is actually a university-wide thing. Do you take advantage of that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, so I think it's through the Office of Parent programs, and all you do is call them up and say, I want to have the students over to my house, and they pay for it.
I've done it every time, and they give you $10 per student, and you can order the food in. It's amazing. We do sushi and pizza. Somehow that's our combination with Mungo, what college students want. And one time, 2 dogs ran in and grabbed some of the pizza out of a rainstorm. So anything can happen. But it's a fantastic program.
What's the largest class you've done?
Well, because I'm teaching like 77 on my 3 load, that's $770 worth of pizza and sushi. So we had like 60 people crammed into my little apartment. I thought the walls were going to blow off.
Any other questions from the audience? Yeah.
What are just in general some of the biggest challenges that you guys face, either in the classroom environment or delivering the best relaying the curriculum? What are just in general some challenges that you're aware of and that you'd like to explain?
Well, I mean, there's a ton of them, and it varies for each class that you're teaching. But ultimately, making sure that you sync with the students on the perspective of what kind of actions are going to get what kind of results. And if everybody agrees that we're all doing the same thing and we're doing it the right way and it will give us an outcome that everyone's happy with, then everything goes nice and smoothly. But it's those times when, I studied but I still didn't get an A on the test, or, there's some other sort of basically discontinuity between what they think they did and what should have happened. Those are the times when it gets very, very difficult. So, I think it almost goes back to the sort of day one question from a minute ago. The more clearly you lay out everything that's going to happen, the better you can avoid those problems.
I'd say an ongoing challenge is technology in the classroom. And I don't have an answer for it, but looking out there and seeing a third of the class, it doesn't really matter how many times I ask or say it. The laptops are up, Facebook is open, the phone is in one hand, the laptop's in the other, and I pretty much take a defeatist pose and say that that I'll try to do something that's interesting enough to keep their attention, but that I won't be able to keep everyone's attention. I don't know what the I don't know what one can do in those situations. Because I want to treat them as adults and be treated as an adult in turn, I don't want to babysit. So there's a part of me that just resists that role. I don't want to get into it. And it's not the same as not caring about their learning, but it's also, I'm not going to go over there and say, what are you doing on your computer? I have kids, I don't want to do that at work. But that's an ongoing challenge to me, is the sheer number of distractions and almost the sort of sense that part of this has to be generational, that they probably don't see it as much as a distraction as I do, that these things they can do all these things at once, or they think they can do all these things at once, and I don't think that I can, so therefore I don't think they can. So that's a challenge I would point out that's ongoing. It's every day.
I share his kind of duality and approach about that problem, because I too want to give up sometimes. The ways I try to defeat that is I give them a quote from Stanley Kubrick where he said, he was interviewing, who's a great filmmaker, and they all know that, he was interviewing somebody for a job and they didn't have a notepad. He said, "Why don't you have a notepad?" And the person said, "Well, I can remember it." And he said, "No, you can't. You'll forget 98% of what I said, and I will also forget 98% of what you said, which is why I have a notepad. If you want to work for me, write down what I said." And then they get all their notepads out. And the other thing I tell them about is a study that they did at MIT. It was a television show on PBS that Alan Alda went to MIT, and the brainy students there thought they could multitask. And they studied them extensively, and no, they can't. And the other quote I give them is about some study that said 50% of college young women hit Facebook within 5 minutes of waking up. And I show how your efficiency totally drops on creative production if you don't spend long periods of time focused on one task at a time, then go to the next task. You cannot perform on a high level and think about your characters and get into their minds by jumping around in your focus. And weirdly, it seems to be working. But I think I've got mass media on my side. I can show them a great film, and when you're lecturing, it's a lot harder to keep drilling that.
We've got time for one more from the audience, and then we'll move on if there are.
What's the most creative excuse you received from a student, and how did you handle that?
Oh boy, here comes the comedy.
I don't get a lot of really creative excuses. Then, tragically, what I find is that the really creative, crazy-sounding things are often true, and that if I'm not, it's a great question for a funny retort, but the sad truth is very often when people come up with something that's outrageous, what you're really looking at is a terribly damaged student. And the more I question it, the more you begin to, the more you realize, oh geez, you're just hurting them much more. So I've had a number of tragedies come up that have turned out to be horribly true. And otherwise, I don't find that they tend to make a lot of serious excuses. If they're going to blow something off, they're not invested enough to come up with a great excuse. But that's...
I mean, I've heard some funny ones, but the truth, I so agree with what John says. I've learned from day one not to prejudge them, because there can be amazing things in the background. They're working 60 hours a week, tending bar. A gentleman was sitting on the desk in class, and I didn't call him on it. He was a kind of scary guy. He looked like Animal Mother from Full Metal Jacket. And I was like, and then one day he's in my office and he's like, I just got back from Afghanistan and I was in combat and I don't want to talk about it. And I go, I don't want to talk about it either, I definitely don't want to talk about it. But it was a process with him where I had to kind of give him a certain amount of latitude. And one day I said, well, why don't you pick up a camera upstairs? This is screenwriting, and I think you can direct. And he went and he directed a short film, and it was about him being a sniper in Afghanistan and accidentally killing someone, a child. And we didn't ask him if it was true. but his whole attitude changed. He originally was writing very violent material, and it was scary how violent it was. And then he kind of became more human in the process. And so if I had prejudged him and gone, stop sitting on the desk, potentially that would have upset him enough where we wouldn't have had a constructive relationship. So
I agree that the creative excuses tend to be the ones that are not funny as much as they are interesting and sometimes true. The uncreative ones are, tend to be more humorous to me. Last year I had so many aunts die that I started to wonder if there was some kind of aunt-killing disease going across the Southeast, and I had to tell my students to at least kill off an uncle or maybe even a parent or a sibling, but that no more aunts, right? That this was...
I've heard my bike got stolen, and I was like, okay. They're like, well, I'll show you the police report. I'm like, no, it's okay. Your bike got stolen.
7 aunts in a class of 36.
Wow.
Maybe it's true. I don't know.
I've been noticing a lot of those kind of removed relatives dying, and you just can't tell, right? It could be totally true.
Yeah, you don't want to err on the side of challenge and then
Such a thing.
bring it right back to you. That's a precarious position.
When someone does have an excuse and you find yourself being tempted to challenge it, you have to ask yourself, what possible good is it going to do if I argue with this person?
Right.
And, you can really waste a lot of time and energy arguing about something as trivial as a missed homework set.
Yeah.
It's not worth it. It ruins the class for you.
So when are you
ruins
going to
the
get it
class for
done,
them.
right? So
Yep.
when can you get it to me?
So this will be our last question for the panel. What advice would you give to a new faculty member or a person who is wanting to, we have some TAs here that are going to pursue this career when they're done at their time at USC. So what one piece of advice would you give them before they embark on that career?
I think, I just have a new faculty member in my area, and she won teaching awards at UC Irvine where she was before, and I think she's an excellent professor. But she was a little fazed by the sort of passive kind of look at the students, and she's giving them very vibrant material, and I told her, just keep working at it. Your reputation will get around. It's almost like this trust thing that it's almost like an institutional trust thing where people start hearing you really are committed, and it may take a semester or so before they really catch on to you, but just keep at it would be my main thing.
To me, I would say talk to your colleagues. Okay, there's no one teaching something, or there's none of you that would be teaching something that's so dramatic and unique that you wouldn't have some colleague who's taught something very similar to it, and will have experiences they can share with you, or that you can learn to avoid. But it's a great resource. Take advantage of it.
Here at CTE.
Yeah, and to look at their materials, to look at what they're doing, and I would just add to be prepared and then be confident that you're prepared, so that your preparations might not always meet with the response that you want to get, but if you trust that you are on top of the material and that you're offering this material and trying to work with it and with the students, then I do think that you're probably reaching more people than you think, and B, that the class will come around.
And if it really goes bad one day, sometimes you have to pretend that you're a professor. What I mean is sometimes you've got to just roll on through. And there was a famous Hollywood producer back in the day, Sam Spiegel, made great movies like Lawrence of Arabia, but he made bombs that didn't work out, and he would buy his best suit and get a $10 cigar and go to the parties and act like nothing was wrong. And sometimes that's what you're doing, because you are up there. You know you have the material, but if you lose confidence, you've got to kind of fake it sometimes, because you know what you're doing is good, and you've prepared, and you deserve to be up there sharing this knowledge and helping them.
Terrific. Well, I want to point out just a couple things before we're done. First of all, I want to thank our panelists for their insight. That's a lot of help. But I know sometimes, especially for early career or TAs, that's a lot of information. You're trying to figure out where to go from here. I want to point out that even though we had 3 different areas, 3 different personalities, and 3 very different perspectives, there are 3 constants that went among all of them that I hope you pull out. Here's the first one. Do you notice that they've all thought about teaching deeply? None of their answers are flippant. Do you notice how long it took for the first person to respond after the question? No one immediately jumped in and just grabbed the mic and went, yeah, I got that. All of them went, thought. They've thought about this and they've worked at it and they're continually reflecting. So that's one thing that all these experts did. Think about it deeply, reflect on it constantly. It's a never-ending process, and I think if you were to ask them that, they would tell you that it doesn't stop. It's a continual process of thinking deeply about what they do. The second thing I hope you realize through that is teaching well is hard. It's not easy. You don't just walk in a room and your graduation gown and your colors flowing behind you, and you wave your hand in the PowerPoint and magically appears, and then you stroll right out to the applause of your admiring students. That's not how it works. It's hard. It's a lot of work. It's difficult. But here's the third thing. You can do it. This is something you can do. You can be an excellent teacher, just the same way these two gentlemen did. If you work at it, apply yourself, go on through, even when it's not going well, plow on through, listen to your colleagues, and you can do this job. It's not impossible. So I just want to encourage you on that this is not, sometimes when you go to these panels that you get the feeling that you're somehow removed from being able to do this. Well, you're not. You can. And that's part of our motto here at the CTE. Everyone here can be an excellent teacher. You can. You've got to work at it. Right? Beautiful.
And if you're a TA, we have the TA award winner speaking in a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
You can
thank
come
you,
listen to
Ruth.
that person too.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Because we make sure that these people that have done a good job, thought about it, that we can showcase them so you can hear what they have to say. So you can come back for the TA.
That's great. So you have 2 assignments. Actually 3. I want you to introduce yourself to at least one of the panelists. Make a connection. They're human. They really are human. They're nice people. They're gregarious people. They enjoy being here. Otherwise, they wouldn't have come. So introduce yourself to at least one of them, preferably one that's not in your area. Make a connection. The second thing I want you to do is introduce yourself to someone sitting in the audience that you don't know that's not in your area and make some connections there. And third, take that white piece of paper, fill it out, and read on your way out. And we really appreciate you and our panelists spending time with us today. Thank you so much for coming. I think that's it. That's it.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. That's a wrap.